First story, Minas Gerais, Brazil, 1985. I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but I guess it's the only way to try to make sense of what happened that day. It all started in 1985, deep in the mines of Minas Gerais, the kind of place where the sun barely gets through the thick layer of earth and rock. It was just me and 6 other guys, all miners, doing the same hard work we did every day. Our routine was simple: go down into the tunnel, dig, breathe in the heavy air, and then go home at the end of the day. But that day was different. Something felt off from the start. The air was warmer than usual, almost suffocating. It wasn't just the heat, though. It was this strange heaviness, like the entire mine was holding its breath. We didn't talk much, but you could see it on everyone's faces. We all felt it. Something was coming, something we couldn't understand, but we all knew we wouldn't be the same after this. Little did I know, that day would be the last time I ever saw the world the way I knew it. The light hit us suddenly. One moment, everything was the usual dimness of the tunnel, and the next, it was as if the whole place had been flooded with pure brightness. It wasn't like a flashlight or the kind of light you see from a car coming through the darkness. This was something different. It was almost too bright, but there was no heat to it, and it wasn't blinding either. It felt like the light wrapped around us, like it was controlling the space. The others were frozen, staring at it, but nobody said anything. I tried to move, but it was like my body refused to listen. My legs felt like they were glued to the ground. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the light was gone. In its place, there was this eerie silence. No buzzing from the lights in the tunnel, no sound of our tools, no breathing, just dead silence. It was as if the world had turned off. My head started to spin, and the last thing I remember is the floor beneath me feeling too soft, like it wasn't real. Then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the ground. At first I thought I was still in the mine, but when I opened my eyes, everything was wrong. The air felt different, fresher, cooler. I sat up quickly, and that's when I realized we weren't in the tunnel anymore. We were outside, far from the mine, in a wide, empty field. The last thing I remembered was being deep underground, so how the hell had we ended up here? My head was still foggy, and my stomach felt like it was turning inside out. I looked around at the others, and they were just as disoriented. Everyone was shaking their heads, trying to piece things together. We couldn't remember how we got here, or how much time had passed. My hands were shaking when I tried to reach for my gear, but it wasn't there. It was like I had been moved in a daze, and the last few hours were a complete blur. I remember feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, like something was wrong on a level I couldn't explain. But I didn't know then just how wrong things really were. I just knew that something about that field, and everything that had happened, was far worse than anything we could ever understand. It didn't take long for the confusion to turn into fear. We were all sitting there in that field, trying to figure out what had happened. My legs were trembling, and I couldn't stop sweating even though it was cool outside. I could see it on the others too. They were just as lost as I was. We tried to call out to each other, but our voices felt strange, like they didn't belong to us anymore. It wasn't just the disorientation. Something about the air felt wrong. It was heavier, thick with a tension I couldn't explain. It felt like something was watching us, but when I looked around, there was nothing there. The land stretched out endlessly, with no sign of civilization anywhere. No roads, no buildings, nothing. Just this empty, desolate space. The more I looked at the others, the more I realized we weren't ourselves anymore. Our eyes were wide, faces pale, bodies stiff. We didn't speak much at first, just sat there trying to process it all. But I knew, deep down, that what had happened in that tunnel wasn't just some weird freak accident. We had been taken, and whatever had happened, to us it wasn't over. I don't know how long we sat there, but when the sky started to darken, that's when I began to remember flashes of what happened after the light. It wasn't clear at first, just random images that made no sense. I saw these figures. They were tall, too tall for humans, and their skin was a pale grey, almost lifeless. Their eyes were huge, black, and seemed to draw everything in, like they could see straight into you, into your very soul. I could remember the feeling of their presence, but the details were blurry, like a dream you try to hold on to but can't. I remember a sense of coldness, an overwhelming cold that made my body freeze, made it hard to breathe. And there was something else too. I could feel them touching me, probing me, like they were scanning me, checking me for something. It felt invasive, uncomfortable, like I wasn't in control of my own body. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I felt small, insignificant, like I was nothing but an experiment to them. But then, just as quickly as the images came, they were gone. I was left with a hollow emptiness, like I had lost something important, something that I couldn't even begin to explain. When I snapped out of that daze, I realized I was surrounded by the others, all of them looking as pale and shaken as I was. Nobody spoke at first. We just sat there, staring into the horizon, where the sky was now darkening with an unnatural kind of stillness. It was like time had stopped. And then one of the guys, Marco, started to speak in a voice that didn't sound like his. It was quieter, distant, almost as if he was talking from far away, like something was pulling him under. He kept saying that he couldn't remember the time between the tunnel and the field, that it felt like his mind had been wiped clean. We all started to speak up, each of us recalling the same strange feeling of amnesia. We all knew something had happened to us, but none of us could put it into words. It was as if our brains were protecting us from something too terrible to process. But even without the details, I knew. I knew what we'd experienced wasn't human. Whatever had taken us from that tunnel and put us in this field, it was far beyond anything I could ever understand. As the minutes turned into hours, a thick, uncomfortable silence settled over us. None of us had the strength to get up, let alone figure out how we were supposed to get back to the mine, or even if we should. The weight of what had happened was suffocating, and no matter how hard I tried to push it away, the dread kept creeping in, gnawing at the edges of my mind. The field stretched endlessly, no end in sight. It felt like we were stuck in some kind of limbo, somewhere that didn't belong to Earth. I couldn't shake the feeling that the air itself was wrong. It wasn't just that it was too still, it had this strange quality to it, almost metallic, like something was off with the world itself. It was like the ground beneath me wasn't solid, like I could fall through it at any moment. I kept looking over at the others, their eyes wide, their faces drawn tight in confusion and fear. Some of them started mumbling, their words jumbled, disconnected. Marco, who'd been the first to speak, was now shaking his head, muttering that his memories felt like they were being erased, like his mind was being pulled away from him. I could see the panic rising in him, but I couldn't help him. None of us could help each other. We were all too lost in this. this place, whatever it was. And then I felt it. The shift. A low hum in the air, barely audible, but unmistakable. My skin tingled and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something was coming. I didn't know what, but I could feel it. Something was watching us again, just like before, but this time it wasn't some vague, distant feeling. It was real. Something was close. That's when the ground shook. It wasn't like an earthquake, more like the earth itself had been disturbed. The vibrations ran through the ground, up into my bones, deep into my chest. I thought for a moment that maybe we were going to sink into the earth, swallowed up by whatever was beneath us. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The others started to panic, shouting out in fear, their voices breaking the heavy silence. But as suddenly as the tremors had begun, they stopped. The air felt heavier now, as if it had thickened, like the atmosphere had become a weight we couldn't escape. And then I saw it. A shape rising from the horizon. It was hard to make out at first, just a shadow against the darkening sky, but it was moving toward us, slowly, almost purposefully. My heart pounded in my chest, and my mind screamed at me to run, to get away. But I couldn't move. None of us could. The shape grew clearer, revealing a massive object, hovering just above the ground. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. It was a ship, but it didn't look like the kind of ship we'd seen in movies. This one had no wings, no visible propulsion, just a smooth metallic surface that reflected the fading light. It didn't make any sound as it moved, but I could feel it in my bones, in the pit of my stomach, like the entire world had shifted around it. It hovered silently, suspended in the air. And as it got closer, I could see the lights, pulsing, changing color, like they were alive, breathing. The same feeling of dread washed over me, stronger now. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't here to help us. I felt it in every fiber of my being, like a gut instinct, deep down. We weren't just being watched anymore. We were being hunted. The ship moved closer, and I could hear it now, not audibly, but inside my head. This hum, this low, constant frequency that seemed to pulse through the air, through my mind. I could feel it vibrating in my skull, making my teeth ache. It was like the ship was communicating with us, but not in any language I understood. It felt like it was reaching into my thoughts, my very being, trying to pull something out of me, something hidden deep down. Panic surged through me, and I could see the same fear mirrored on the faces of the others. But we couldn't move, couldn't run. It was like we were paralyzed, caught in the ship's gaze. Then, suddenly, the lights from the ship flared, blindingly bright, and I heard a sound. A strange, high-pitched hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating in my chest, in my bones. My head felt like it was splitting open, like my brain was being torn apart. And just as quickly as it had started, everything stopped. The light, the noise, the pressure, all of it was gone. But I knew it wasn't over. I knew something had just happened, something I couldn't explain. But I felt it in my gut. I felt it in my skin. Whatever those things were, whatever had taken us that day in the mine, they weren't done with us yet. I didn't know how, but I knew we were marked, and that fear, the deep, sickening dread, would follow me for the rest of my life. We stayed there, frozen, for what felt like hours. The ship had disappeared, but the silence it left behind was deafening. It was like the whole world had been drained of sound, There was no wind, no rustling of leaves, nothing. Just this oppressive, crushing silence that weighed down on us. I don't know how we managed to get to our feet, but we did. Slowly, one by one, we stood up, our movements stiff and jerky as if we were waking from some kind of deep sleep. But it wasn't sleep. We all knew that. We'd been somewhere else, somewhere we couldn't explain, and whatever had happened to us, it was still with us. I could see it in their eyes, those same haunted, distant stares. The others weren't themselves anymore. They looked hollow, broken. We didn't talk much. No one spoke of the ship or the things we had felt. It was as if mentioning it would somehow make it more real, more terrifying. But we didn't need to say anything. We all knew that whatever happened in the mine, we had been marked by something beyond our comprehension. It wasn't just the memory of it. It was in the way we moved, in the way we breathed. We were different, and there was no going back. We started walking. Nobody knew where we were going or how to get out of that field, but we walked anyway. The land stretched out before us, featureless, endless. I tried to focus on the ground beneath my feet, on putting one foot in front of the other. But my mind kept wandering back to that moment, to the ship, to those terrible eyes that had locked onto mine. I could still feel them, staring through me, like they knew everything there was to know about me. There was no escaping it. It was like that moment had marked me, branded me, in a way that I couldn't understand. And the others, Marco, Pedro, Vinicius, all of them, they were the same. They were all haunted by the same memory, the same feeling. We couldn't escape it, no matter how hard we tried. I could hear them muttering, but none of it made sense. Their voices were distant, like they weren't really there. I kept my eyes on the horizon, searching for anything that might give me an answer, but it was the same unbroken field as far as the eye could see. My legs were growing tired, and I felt like I was losing track of time, like the day was stretching on forever. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't sit down, couldn't rest. It was as if something inside me was driving me forward, pushing me to keep going, even though I didn't know where I was headed. Hours, or maybe days, I couldn't tell, had passed when I saw it. In the distance, there was something new on the horizon. A shadow, a shape. It was hard to make out at first, but it was different from everything else in the field. The others didn't seem to notice, or maybe they just didn't care. They were still moving, their steps slow and heavy, like they were walking through quicksand. But when I saw it, I knew. I knew it wasn't just another mirage, another trick of the mind. I started walking faster, my heart racing. The others didn't follow. They didn't even look up. But I couldn't ignore it. I needed to see what it was. As I moved closer, the shape became clearer and my stomach dropped. It was a structure. Something man-made. But it wasn't a building or a house. It looked like a facility of some sort, with tall walls and an entrance that seemed to be waiting for me. I don't know why I felt drawn to it. I just knew that whatever was inside that place had something to do with what had happened to us. It was the only place that felt familiar, like it had been there all along, just waiting for us to find it. But when I looked back at the others, they were still stumbling forward, oblivious to everything. It was like they were already lost, already gone. But I wasn't ready to give up yet. I couldn't just let it go. I had to know what was in that place. As I approached the structure, my mind was racing with questions, but I couldn't find the answers. My steps were quick, but every part of me felt heavy, weighed down by dread. The closer I got, the more. It felt like the air was pushing against me, like some invisible force was trying to keep me away. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let go of the feeling that whatever had happened to us in the field, in that strange limbo, was somehow connected to this place. The walls were tall and imposing, dark gray, made of some material I didn't recognize. It wasn't concrete, not like anything I'd seen before. The surface was smooth, shiny, and slick, almost metallic. As I stepped closer, I noticed faint patterns etched into the walls, symbols or markings that seemed to pulse with a dim light. I reached out instinctively, but just before my fingers touched the surface, I felt a sharp jolt, like an electric shock, that made my hand snap back. It wasn't painful, but it was enough to make me freeze in place, and then I heard it, the low hum again. It was coming from inside the structure. It was faint, almost like a whisper, but it was unmistakable. My heart skipped a beat. The sound seemed to resonate in my chest, deep, almost as if it was calling to me. But I hesitated. Something in me wanted to turn around, to go back to the others, to forget this whole thing. But another part of me, the part that had felt that same pull in the mine, pushed me forward. I stepped closer to the entrance, knowing that whatever was inside, whatever was waiting for me, it was connected to everything. The fear was suffocating, but I had to know. I couldn't leave without understanding. The door, or whatever it was, seemed to open on its own. I didn't hear any mechanism, no clicks or grinding gears. It just slid apart, revealing the darkness inside. I took a breath, steadying myself, and stepped through. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air inside was different. It was colder, much colder than outside, and the smell, it was metallic, sharp, like something sterile. The inside was dimly lit, the lights low and faint, casting long shadows that seemed to move in the corners of my vision. I couldn't explain it, but everything inside felt alive, like it was watching me. My footsteps echoed in the empty space, but the sound felt muffled, as though the walls were absorbing the noise. I didn't know how deep the place went, but I knew it was vast. There were hallways, rooms that stretched out into the darkness, and faint sounds, whispers, static, coming from all directions. I felt like I was being led, as though the place had a mind of its own, guiding me further in. As I walked deeper, I came across a series of tables, metallic, cold, with restraints attached to them. My stomach twisted at the sight. I didn't know why, but the moment I saw those tables, I knew they had been used. I knew that they had been meant for us. The thought made my skin crawl. I stepped back, my breathing growing erratic. That's when I saw it. At the far end of the room, there was something that didn't belong. It was a machine, strange and unfamiliar, with long, sharp-looking appendages extending from it. It looked like a cross between something mechanical and organic, pulsing with that same dim light. My pulse quickened. I wanted to leave, I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't obey. It was as if the machine itself had a pull on me, like it was drawing me in, making me stay. I don't know how much time passed, but it felt like hours. I was standing there, paralyzed, staring at the machine. My mind screamed at me to get out, to run before it was too late, but I couldn't move. I could feel my heart racing, pounding in my chest, my breath shallow, but still I couldn't break free of the hold the place had on me. The machine hummed, a low mechanical sound that seemed to resonate in my bones. Then, suddenly, something shifted in the air. The hum stopped, A door, hidden in the shadows, slid open, and out of it stepped one of them, one of the things that had taken us. It wasn't the same figure I remembered from before, but it was close. Its skin was the same pale grey, its eyes just as black, but it wasn't as tall as the others. It was shorter, almost human in stature, but still unnervingly alien. Its face was smooth, no features, just these black, empty eyes that seemed to drink in the room, the air, the very space around it. And then, as if sensing my fear, it turned, its gaze to me. My breath caught in my throat. I froze, unable to move, unable to even blink. It wasn't just looking at me, it was seeing me, truly seeing me, like it knew everything about me, everything I had ever done, everything I had ever thought. It stepped forward slowly, its movements fluid, deliberate. I could feel it drawing, closer, and that's when I realized the hum wasn't just a sound. It was part of them, part of whatever it was they used to communicate, to connect. And in that moment, I knew. I knew that this wasn't just some isolated event, some random encounter. No, we weren't the first and we wouldn't be the last. I was just one of many, and whatever they wanted from us, they were never going to stop. My mind was scrambling, trying to find some way out, some way to make sense of the nightmare unfolding before me. But there was no escape, no reasoning with it. The thing was getting closer, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. It wasn't just the creature, no, it was everything. The cold, the hum, the air that felt too thick to breathe. It was as if reality itself had warped. I tried to speak, but my voice wouldn't come. My throat was dry, raw. The creature's eyes were locked onto me, its gaze so intense that it felt like it was peeling back my skin, exposing everything beneath. I could feel it probing my mind, searching through my memories, my deepest fears. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but all I could do was stand there, frozen in terror. It came closer still, until it was mere inches away. I could smell it, an acrid metallic odor like blood mixed with iron. Its presence was suffocating, overwhelming. I don't know how long we stood there, but in that moment, time didn't feel real. I felt like I was stuck in some kind of endless loop, trapped between two worlds. Then suddenly the creature's hand reached out, not with aggression, but with a strange, almost deliberate calm. It wasn't like it was going to harm me, not immediately. It felt more like it was studying me, testing me. I don't remember what happened next, whether I fainted or whether I was simply knocked out. But I woke up outside, back in that empty field with the others. We were all lying on the ground, disoriented, confused, and completely out of our minds with fear. The sky was dark, the stars too bright, and for the first time I realized we weren't just stranded in some random field. We were miles away from the mine, in a place that didn't feel like home. I don't know if it was some kind of experiment, or if we had been chosen for something more sinister, but whatever happened to us in that structure, it changed everything. We weren't just lost in the field, we were lost in time. Lost in something much bigger than us. I've tried to live my life since then, but I can never forget the way those eyes looked at me. Those eyes that seemed to know everything. I can't escape it. None of us can. Second story, Witwatersrand Gold Mine Abduction, South Africa, 1972. It was on a night shift at Witwatersrand Gold Mine in 1972. I was deep underground, in one of the older shafts, far from the familiar sounds of the drill rigs and trucks that usually echoed through the tunnels. I had been working the night shift for months, so the long hours didn't bother me much anymore. But that night was different. There was something in the air that felt wrong. As I descended deeper into the mine, I felt the temperature drop, and the hairs on the back of my neck began to stand up. The lights above me flickered. At first I thought it was just a faulty connection, but then it happened again, and again. The rhythmic flickering started to unsettle me, but I carried on. There was work to be done. The mine was silent except for the occasional clang of my pick against rock, and the deeper I went, the more oppressive the quiet became. I was about a mile underground when it first hit me. The pressure. It wasn't like the usual discomfort of being so far below ground. This was different. It started in my head, a feeling like 1,000 pounds pressing down on my skull, squeezing it, like someone was gripping my mind from the inside. My breath quickened as I stumbled and clutched the wall for balance. It felt as though the very air around me was thickening, suffocating. I tried to steady myself, but the pressure kept mounting until I couldn't tell if it was in my head or if the whole shaft was collapsing around me. But no, it wasn't that. I wasn't going crazy. My mind was sharp, too sharp, and then it happened. My feet left the ground. It wasn't gradual like a rise from an elevator. No, I shot upwards violently as though the ground itself was rejecting me. I had no control, and I couldn't scream. It was as if my voice had been stolen from me. I tried to move, to kick, to grasp anything, but nothing helped. I felt weightless, suspended in mid-air, as though gravity itself had betrayed me. My heart was pounding in my chest and my eyes were wide, taking in the chaos of the darkened mine shafts below me. I was high up, too high, but there was no ceiling above me, no walls, just the pitch blackness of the mine stretching endlessly, and this unbearable weight on my head. My body was still, but my mind screamed in confusion. And then there was a light. A brilliant, sharp, blinding light. It surrounded me, coming from all sides. It wasn't like any light I had ever seen. There were no sources, no bulbs or lamps. It was just there, pulsating, as if the very air was alive with energy. It wrapped around me like a cloak. For the briefest moment I wondered if I was dead. This had to be some kind of hell, didn't it? The lights became brighter and brighter, and I felt my body becoming weightless again, pulled upward like I was a mere speck in the universe. Time stopped. There were no more sounds, no more feelings. I can't explain how long I was up there. Seconds, hours, days. It felt like eternity. But when I finally became aware again, I was no longer in the mine. I wasn't even in the same place at all. I could still feel the pressure, but it was more subtle now, like a constant hum at the edges of my consciousness. And then I saw it. The ship. I don't even know how to describe it. It wasn't metallic like you might imagine from stories. It wasn't even really a shape. It was more like a mass of light, shifting and changing. It was as though the light itself was alive, and it was the source of everything around me. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I could barely breathe. And yet I knew I was not alone. There were things. I couldn't see them clearly, but I could sense them, hovering just out of my line of sight, like shadows darting from corner to corner. I couldn't look directly at them. I just knew. They weren't human. They didn't feel human. They didn't feel like anything I had ever encountered. I was aware of them, and they were aware of me. I don't know how long it lasted, but when I finally felt the shift, the pull that brought me back down, I felt nothing but dread. When I landed, if that's even the right word, it wasn't like touching the ground again. There was no soft thud, no settling of my body back into familiar space. Instead, I was dropped. It felt like being plopped back into my own reality, only this time, everything was distorted. The mine, the walls, the very air around me, it all felt off. The air was thick, like it was trying to swallow me whole. My ears rang, and for a moment I thought I was still in the ship, still trapped in that unbearable, floating nothingness. But when my legs buckled beneath me and I crumpled onto the cold, familiar stone of the shaft floor, I realized that I was back, somehow back. But it wasn't the same. I wasn't the same. My body felt wrong, like it had been rearranged, like parts of me had been shifted and twisted in ways I couldn't comprehend. My head ached with an intensity that left me gasping for breath. I couldn't think straight. I tried to move, but my limbs felt heavy, sluggish, like I was dragging them through water. And then, when I reached for my wrist, I noticed something was even more off. My watch. The one I'd been wearing for years, a high-end model, nothing cheap. It had stopped. Completely. Not like a battery running out. It was frozen the second. Hand halted in time. And it wasn't just a momentary glitch. The time it showed didn't make sense. Hours had passed in the blink of an eye, yet it was as though they had never existed. My heart dropped into my stomach. I was confused, panicked, but I couldn't stop staring at it. This watch that shouldn't have stopped. I forced myself to get up, to move, to escape whatever fog had descended on me. I had to get out of that place, but I couldn't remember how to get back. The corridors of the mine were twisted, unfamiliar. The usual paths were gone, as if they had been erased. I staggered down what I thought was the correct tunnel, but the walls felt wrong. The air felt wrong. My footsteps echoed unnervingly in the silence. There was no sound, no usual hum of machinery, no voices of other miners. Just the pounding of my heart in my chest and the echo of my own breath. It was as if I was utterly alone. No, not alone. I wasn't alone. I could still feel them, those things, the ones that had watched me. The ones that had been in that light. They were here. With me, I don't know how I knew, but I did. I couldn't see them, couldn't hear them, but I felt their presence like a weight pressing against my skin. My breath hitched and I felt the same dread that I had felt on that ship. That place I couldn't explain. And then I heard something. Just a whisper. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't even a sound, it was a thought, a vibration in the air, deep in my mind. You are not alone. That voice, or whatever it was, stayed with me as I stumbled through the mine. I thought it was the fear messing with my head, but no matter how many times I shook it off, no matter how hard I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, the feeling lingered. I wasn't alone. They were there, watching. I don't know how. Long I wandered through the dark tunnels. It felt like hours, maybe more. My body was exhausted, but my mind was racing, constantly on alert. There was no escape. It was as though the mine itself was designed to trap me in this nightmare, to stretch the time between breaths, between footsteps. I finally made it to the elevator shaft, and I thought, finally, I could get out of there. I reached for the button, my hands shaking, but the elevator never came. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. The air had become even heavier, and my legs refused to move. My body felt like it was glued to the spot. I looked down at my wrist again, but the watch hadn't changed. It was still frozen, stuck in that same moment. That's when the rumble started. Low at first, just a tremor beneath the ground. But then it grew. It wasn't the usual shaking of the mine. No. This was different. This was something deeper, something far more unnatural. The ground beneath me seemed to pulse with energy, as though the very earth was alive. My heart hammered in my chest. I knew something was coming. I had no idea what, but I knew. The rumbling grew louder, more violent. It was no longer just the ground shaking beneath me. The very air seemed to vibrate with it, like an invisible force was pushing against me, pressing me further into the mine's cold stone. My instincts screamed at me to move, but my body refused to cooperate. I could feel the tension building, the undeniable sense that something was about to happen. I looked around, desperate, but there was no escape. The elevator was still dead, the mine shaft twisted in unfamiliar ways, and the walls, which once felt so solid and dependable, now seemed to warp and shimmer like the edges of a dream. And then I saw it. At first, it was just a flicker, a shadow moving in the corner of my vision, but when I turned to look, it was gone. I blinked, trying to focus, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but my mind wouldn't cooperate. Was it one of the things, the ones from the ship? Was I losing my mind? The more I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, the more the feeling of being watched intensified. I could feel their eyes on me, even though I couldn't see them. Every hair on my body stood on end as I turned in a slow circle, hoping, praying that I was wrong, that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then, the light returned. It wasn't like before. It wasn't blinding or overwhelming. No, this time it was subtle, faint, like a glow just beyond my reach. And this time, it wasn't coming from above like I remembered. No, this light was coming from the walls themselves, seeping through the cracks in the stone as though the very mine was breathing. The walls flickered and shimmered, pulsating with a rhythm that matched the rumbling beneath my feet. The air felt alive again, thick with the same strange energy. And with it, the presence, that feeling that had never left, only grown stronger, became almost unbearable. I can't explain what happened next. I wish I could. My body was shaking, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and terror. I remember reaching out toward the light, my hands trembling as if they had a will of their own. The moment my fingers brushed the wall, the world around me seemed to snap. I could feel my body being pulled again, not violently this time, but with a sense of purpose. It was like I was being sucked into the very air around me, like the light was consuming me, pulling me into it. The sensation was impossible to describe. It wasn't like anything I had ever felt before. I wasn't falling. I wasn't floating. It was more like being disassembled. My limbs felt like they were stretching, like they were being pulled apart at the molecular level. I could feel the fibers of my skin, the blood in my veins, the atoms that made up my body all trembling under the weight of some force I couldn't understand. I wanted to scream, to cry out, but I couldn't. My mouth refused to work, my voice lost. It was as though I had been erased, made invisible, pulled apart in the most intimate, horrifying way. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The light vanished. The pressure lifted. The wall stopped flickering and the rumbling ceased. It was silent. Dead silent. The kind of silence that is louder than any noise. The kind of silence that wraps around you, suffocating you, leaving you alone in the vast emptiness. I was back in the mine, but I wasn't the same. When I looked at my hands, they looked strange, as though they weren't mine. My skin was pale, almost translucent, and there was something wrong with the way I moved, like my joints didn't bend the way they should. I felt weak, like my body had been drained, like the energy that once powered me was gone. The mine felt colder now. The air wasn't just thick with energy anymore, it was dead. I don't know how long I stood there, motionless, my body refusing to cooperate, but it felt like hours, maybe more. I thought about the other miners, the ones who had worked in that shaft. Had they felt it too? Had they been taken like I had? I couldn't remember. It was all a blur now, like a dream I couldn't shake. But one thing was certain, whatever had happened to me that night was real. I wasn't the same person anymore, and I couldn't explain it, not to anyone, not even to myself. But there was one thing I could do. I could get out. I couldn't stay in that place. I couldn't stay in that hole. I stumbled toward the elevator shaft again, my legs unsteady, my mind clouded. But when I finally reached it, the elevator was waiting for me. The doors slid open without a sound, and I stepped in. There was no one else inside. It was just me. The lights flickered one last time before the doors closed, and I pressed the button to go up. But as the elevator ascended, I felt it again. The weight, the presence. I wasn't alone. I never had been. The elevator ride felt endless. My legs were shaking, barely able to keep me standing. But I didn't dare sit down. I couldn't. The fear was too much, gnawing at me, crawling under my skin. My mind kept replaying the events of the night, everything that had happened, everything I couldn't explain. What had they done to me? What were they? The feeling of their presence, that suffocating weight in the air, never left me. I kept glancing around, expecting to see them standing in the corner of the elevator, but there was nothing, only silence. That thick, heavy silence, and the lights. They flickered again, once, twice, longer this time, until the elevator finally came to a screeching halt. The doors opened to reveal the surface, but it wasn't the same. The mine shaft, the world I had worked in for so long, was gone. The ground beneath me felt wrong. The sky above me was no longer the sky I remembered. Everything was off, out of place. The air didn't smell the same, didn't feel the same. Even the light from the moon, it was strange. It cast everything in a dull, unnatural glow, like the entire world had shifted out of focus. It was like stepping into a painting, a world that didn't quite fit. I stumbled out of the elevator, taking in the desolation that surrounded me. The mine's entrance was eerily quiet. No trucks, no workers, no sounds of the world I knew. Everything was still. The only sound was the wind, and even that felt alien, whispering strange things I couldn't understand. It felt like I had stepped into another world, another time. I looked down at my watch again, still frozen. The time had stopped. I was stuck in that moment, in that terrible, terrible moment. and I didn't know how to get out of it. I don't remember how I made it home. The journey was a blur. I remember the streets, the flickering streetlights, the hum of the cars in the distance, but nothing felt right. Every corner I turned, every face I saw, it was like the world was watching me. I felt like a stranger in my own skin. No matter how many times I tried to tell myself it was all over, that I was safe, my body wouldn't listen. I could still feel their eyes on me, feel the vibration of their presence in the pit of my stomach. I felt like I was being hunted, not by anything I could see, but by something far worse. By the time I reached my apartment, it was early morning. The world was waking up, but I felt like I was still trapped in the night, in the horror I had just escaped. I slammed the door shut behind me, locked it, and stumbled into my bathroom. I needed to see myself. I needed to check. I needed to know that I was still human. When I looked into the mirror, I didn't recognize the face staring back at me. My eyes were bloodshot, sunken, as if I hadn't slept in days. My skin was pale, almost sickly. I ran my hands through my hair, feeling the dry, brittle strands. I touched my wrist, but the watch was still frozen. The same time, I tried to take it off, but it wouldn't budge. It was like it had fused with my skin. That's when I realized the light had left something behind. Something had changed. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, their shapes, their eyes, their cold, lifeless presence. I couldn't get the image out of my head, and every time I looked at my watch, the seconds seemed to stretch out like I was caught in an endless loop. I tried to ignore it, tried to go back to my life, but I couldn't. I couldn't pretend everything was fine. The nightmares didn't stop. They only grew worse. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart racing, convinced I could feel their presence in my room, just behind me, waiting for me to fall asleep again. I went to see a doctor, thinking maybe I had just gone insane from the stress, but the tests came back clean. Nothing wrong with me. I tried to explain to him what had happened, but he just looked at me like I was a madman. "You're fine, Abraham," he said. "You probably just had a bad dream." A bad dream. A bad dream? I wanted to laugh or scream, but I just nodded and left. I knew he couldn't understand. He hadn't been there. He hadn't felt it. The days dragged on in a haze of confusion and unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that I wasn't truly here, that the world around me had been subtly rearranged while I wasn't looking. Every time I left my apartment, I felt eyes on me. But when I turned around, there was nothing. People moved in strange, jerky ways like puppets whose strings had been pulled wrong. I tried to ignore it, tried to pretend I was just losing my grip on reality, but deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. The presence was still there, following me, haunting me from the corner of my mind. I couldn't escape it. It felt like it was inside me now, like I was carrying a piece of whatever I had encountered back in the mine. Sometimes I could hear it, the low hum of that otherworldly energy, like a distant echo, always just beyond reach. And every night when I tried to sleep, I would wake up again, gasping for air, drenched in sweat. It had become impossible to tell where the dream ended and the reality began. I wasn't the only one who had experienced something in that mine, I found out. There were rumors, whispers among the miners that something had been going on for years. Some of the older guys had stories of strange lights, strange feelings, deep in the shafts. One guy swore he saw a figure standing in the dark, just beyond the reach of his light, but when he got closer it was gone. Another had a similar experience, and when he came back, he was never the same. Quiet, withdrawn, staring off into space like he was lost in another world. I couldn't stop thinking about those stories, about the miners who had come before me, who had seen things, felt things that no one else could explain. I thought about the feeling I had in that shaft, the way the air felt alive, the way I was being watched even before anything happened. Had they been abducted too? Was it just a matter of time before the same thing happened to them? The more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't just me. Whatever they were, whatever happened in that mine, it was connected. I tried to warn a few of the younger miners, but they just laughed it off. They said I was imagining things, that it was all just a coincidence. But I couldn't let go of it. I couldn't stop thinking about the light, the pressure, the way the walls moved around me. Something was wrong, and I wasn't the only one who had seen it. I wasn't the only one who had felt it. But I didn't know how to prove it. I didn't know how to make anyone believe me. So, I kept it to myself. I kept the truth locked away, buried deep inside, hoping one day it would make sense. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw them again. Their eyes, their cold, distant gaze. They were always there, watching me from the shadows. Months passed, and life continued. I tried to move on. I tried to convince myself it was just a dream, just a hallucination. But then, one night I found something I couldn't explain. I was cleaning my apartment when I noticed something strange on the floor. A small silver disc about the size of a coin. It looked like nothing I'd ever seen before. Smooth, almost metallic, with intricate patterns etched into the surface. It was cold to the touch, like it had been sitting in ice for years. I picked it up, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't need to ask where it had come from. I didn't need to wonder who had left it there. It was them. It had to be. I could feel the energy radiating off of it. I could hear the hum of that same deep vibration I'd felt in the mine. As if it had been waiting for me to find it. I didn't know what to do with it. I couldn't throw it away. Part of me feared what would happen if I did, but I couldn't keep it either. It was too much, too real. In that moment, I understood. They had marked me. They had chosen me. And no matter how hard I tried to forget, I would never escape them. I was one of their own now, whether I liked it or not, and there was nothing I could do about it. The disc is gone now. I don't know what happened to it. I never told anyone about it, and I never will. I don't want to know what might happen if I do. But I can't forget. I can't stop thinking about it, about them. They're always there, just on the edge of my vision, just beyond my reach. I hear them sometimes in the silence of the night, a soft hum in the distance. I know they're waiting, watching. I don't know if they'll come for me again, but I know they will. What happened to me that night in the mine is something I can't explain. I don't know how to make sense of it, but I know it was real. I know I wasn't just imagining it, and I know I'll never be the same. I don't know what they want or why they chose me, but I know one thing for sure. They're still out there, and one day, they'll come back. If you're enjoying this and want to support the channel in bringing more chilling stories like this, any contribution is greatly appreciated. The donation link is just below this video. It's safe, easy, and fast. No registration required. Even the smallest support means so much. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Third story. The encounter in the underground of a copper mine, Chile, 1991. I know this is going to be hard for some of you to believe, but I have to share what happened that day. I never thought I'd be here, posting in an abduction forum, talking about something so insane. It was just another Tuesday, or at least it seemed that way at first. Me and two other guys were working in a copper mine in the north of Chile. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, just the usual mining work. The heat was suffocating, the air dry, and the rhythmic sounds of our tools scraping against rock were like a constant hum in the background. The mine was remote, surrounded by nothing but desert, far from any town. We were used to it. It was home. But then, everything changed. It started with a light. At first, I thought it was just a reflection, maybe the sun catching off something we hadn't noticed. But then it grew. Fast. A brilliant, blinding blue light. It wasn't like anything I had ever seen before, like a glow that didn't belong to this world. I remember squinting, trying to shield my eyes, but it didn't help. The light felt like it was invading my mind, like it was reaching inside of me. And then, nothing. My vision went completely black. The next thing I knew, I was on the ground. I don't know how much time had passed. All I could hear was the distant echo of my own heartbeat in my ears. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the mine. At least, not the way I remembered it. The air was different. It smelled strange, sterile, like something I couldn't identify. The ground felt soft under my body, not like the cold, rough stone of the mine floor. I tried to get up, but my body wouldn't respond. I could feel my arms, but they felt heavy, like they weren't mine anymore. Panic started to rise in me. I looked around, desperate to make sense of where I was. That's when I saw them. Figures standing in front of me, watching me. They weren't human, not in any way I could recognize. Their skin was a pale, sickly gray, almost translucent in the dim light. Their eyes, I don't even know how to explain it. Huge, black. So black that it felt like they could see straight into my soul. I tried to scream, to move, but my voice wouldn't come, and my limbs felt paralyzed. It was like they were controlling me, holding me down without touching me. The next thing I remember was being inside something, some kind of ship. At least, that's what I think it was. It didn't look like anything I could describe. The walls were smooth, like metal, but not. Everything felt wrong, like gravity didn't work properly, or maybe it was just me. The room was dimly lit by strange, shifting lights that didn't seem to have a source. I couldn't tell if I was standing or floating. I couldn't tell if I was even in my own body anymore. There were other people around me, but they didn't seem to be conscious. I could hear them breathing, their shallow breaths. But no one moved. They were like statues. And then there was this voice. It wasn't spoken out loud, but it was inside my head, like it was in my thoughts, but not mine. It was cold, emotionless. It told me to relax, to not fight, that it was all going to be over soon. But there was nothing relaxing about it. The whole time I felt like I was being observed, prodded, analyzed. My body felt like it was being turned inside out. My heart raced, but I couldn't move to run or scream. I don't even remember if I was breathing. My body was numb, and I couldn't escape from whatever was happening to me. I don't know how long I was out. It felt like hours, but it could have been days. Time didn't make sense there. The next thing I knew, I was being pulled from whatever dreamlike state I'd been in. My body felt cold, stiff. When I opened my eyes, the mine was back. But it wasn't right. I could hear the sounds of the drilling and the distant chatter of the other workers, but it felt like they were miles away. I could barely make out the shapes of my colleagues standing in front of me, their faces twisted in confusion. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, my voice nothing more than a rasp. I looked at my hands, and something wasn't right. My watch, which had always been reliable, was shattered. The time was stuck, frozen at 3:15, and there was this strange buzzing sound in my ears that wouldn't go away. It was as if something was off. I looked up at the sky. It was a clear day, no clouds, but the light, there was something wrong with the light. It was too sharp, too bright, and it made my eyes burn. I staggered toward my colleagues, trying to explain, but they just stared at me, as if they didn't recognize me. They didn't know what I was talking about. None of them had seen the light. None of them had seen them. They said I was out, cold for at least a few hours, but it felt like just minutes to me. I knew something had happened. I felt it. But no one believed me. I don't even know why I stayed. After everything, I should have just walked away, told the company I was done. But something kept me there. Maybe it was because I didn't want to admit how scared I was. Maybe I just wanted some answers. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, that they were still out there. And for days, I kept seeing that light, just out of the corner of my eye. Every time I looked at the sky, I'd swear I saw a flicker of it, like a reflection, always there, but never enough to be sure. It was like the light was waiting for me to look at it directly. I could feel it, even when I was underground working the drill. And then one evening, it happened again. This time, I was outside taking a break. I was staring at the horizon when the light appeared, bright, too bright. It came out of nowhere like it had followed me. I don't know how long it lasted, but when I looked around, the other workers were gone. I was alone. I tried to scream, but my voice was gone again. My body felt weak, like I was being pulled up by invisible strings. And then, just as suddenly, as it came, the light disappeared. I was back, but everything felt wrong. I was back in the mine, but the walls felt different. Everything was colder. My body hurt, like I'd been asleep for days, even though it had only been a few minutes. My hands shook as I looked around. The worst part was that no one believed me. When I tried to tell the other guys, they just looked at me like I was crazy. They said I was probably just dehydrated or working too hard, that the stress of the job was getting to me. They said I needed to rest. But how could I explain what I felt? How could I tell them that something had touched my mind, that it wasn't just a bad dream, that they were real, they were here, and I wasn't the only one who'd seen it? A few days later, one of the guys who'd been working with us told me he'd seen the light too, but it wasn't the same. His experience was different. He wasn't aware of the creatures, the beings like I had been. He'd just seen the light and then suddenly lost track of time, like me. He said it was as if something had pulled him from the mine, but he couldn't remember anything else. He was disoriented just like me, and for a while I thought maybe I wasn't losing my mind. But then, just as quickly, he backed off. He said he didn't want to get involved. He told me to forget it, that we couldn't talk about it. The others, they didn't want to hear anymore. They treated it like a joke, like we were just out in the desert too long and imagined the whole thing. But something in me told me that it wasn't just in my head. The more I tried to ignore it, the harder it became to deny what had happened. The memories kept coming back, not in clear images, but in flashes, snippets of that place, those beings. The worst part was the feeling that I wasn't alone. Even when I was at home, safe, I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, hearing that same buzzing noise from before. The kind that you feel in your bones. It was almost like it was calling to me, like it was waiting for me to go back, to find answers. And then one night, a strange thing happened. I was back in the mine, alone. The light didn't come from above this time. It was coming from beneath me. It started as a faint glow under the ground, just a small sliver of blue light coming from the cracks in the earth. I felt compelled to follow it, even though every fiber of my body was screaming at me to run, but I couldn't. I had to go toward it. And as I moved deeper into the mine, the ground beneath me vibrated like the whole place was alive. I swear, I heard whispers low and indistinct coming from the walls. I could feel them again, them, the creatures, the watchers. I knew they were waiting, and I knew that whatever happened, I had to face them. When I reached the source of the light, I was horrified to find that it wasn't just the ground glowing. There was a massive hole in the floor, like something had ripped through it, leaving a circular opening that looked as if it went straight down into the earth. The light was coming from deep within that hole, an eerie, pulsing glow that made my heart race. I could feel the air around it, cold, unnatural. I don't know why, but something made me lean over the edge and look down. That's when I saw it. A figure standing at the bottom looking up at me. It wasn't human, not even close. It was tall, far too tall, with skin that looked like it had been stretched too thin, a pale, almost translucent shade. Its eyes, those damn eyes, were as big as my entire head, black as night, and they glowed like the light from deep within the mine. It was watching me, and I could feel it in my soul. It knew me. It knew me. And for a moment, I couldn't breathe. My body felt frozen, locked in place. I couldn't look away. The longer I stared at it, the more I felt like I was being pulled into that hole, into the darkness. But just as I thought I was going to fall, I snapped back. I don't remember how I got back to the surface. One minute I was staring into that black abyss, and the next I was gasping for air, standing outside the mine, with the sun blinding my eyes. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands were shaking uncontrollably. I looked around. No one else was there. The mine was silent, but there was something off about the air, like everything was holding its breath. I tried to call out, but my voice was gone. I couldn't move for a few seconds, as if my body was still trapped in that place. It felt like the world was upside down. When I finally gathered enough strength to move, I stumbled toward the entrance, but I stopped, short. There, on the ground, was my watch, the same one that had been shattered before. It was intact now, but the time was wrong. It was still frozen at 3:15, but now the hands were pointing in different directions, like they were bent out of shape. I couldn't make sense of it. It felt like I had just woken up from a nightmare, but the nightmare was real. As I turned to walk away, I caught a glimpse of something in the sky. That same blue light. It was distant, but I knew it was watching me, waiting. It wasn't long after that when things started getting worse. I tried to go back to work, tried to pretend that everything was normal, but I couldn't. The mine was no longer just a workplace. It was a prison. Every time I went down into the tunnels, I felt it. The pressure, the unease, like the walls were closing in on me. The buzzing in my ears grew louder, more intense, until I couldn't focus on anything else. Even when I wasn't in the mine, I'd wake up in the middle of the night gasping for air, my body drenched in sweat. My mind would go back to that place, the hole in the ground, the creature staring up at me, its eyes following my every move. And then the dreams started. Not regular dreams. They felt like memories that didn't belong to me. I'd be in the same ship I'd seen before, surrounded by those same beings. But this time, I was awake. My body felt like it was being torn apart, piece by piece, while they watched. I tried to scream, but my mouth wouldn't work. It was like they were doing something to me, something I couldn't comprehend. The dreams were too vivid, too real, and the fear I felt in them stayed with me long after I woke up. There was no escape from it. It was only when I met with the other workers, the ones who had been there that day, that I realized I wasn't alone in this. One of them, Jose, started talking about the light. He said it had happened to him too, but he hadn't wanted to tell anyone because of how crazy it sounded. I guess I wasn't the only one who felt the pull, who felt like we were being watched. He'd been there, just like I had, but he didn't remember much. He'd woken up in the same state, disoriented, with no real recollection of what had happened. But there was something in his eyes that told me he knew more than he was letting on. The others didn't believe us, but Jose and I kept meeting in secret, talking about what we had experienced. That's when we started piecing things together. The light wasn't just a random event, it was connected to something bigger, something hidden beneath the mine. We both started noticing strange things. Metal fragments embedded in the walls, patterns that didn't belong, like someone or something had been digging for something. But every time we tried to get closer to the truth, the more things seemed to slip away from us. It was like someone was erasing our memories, keeping us in the dark, manipulating us. It wasn't until weeks later that I found out we weren't the only ones. A few of the other miners, the ones who had been working the deeper shafts, started talking about hearing strange noises underground. Some claimed they'd seen things, shadows that moved, figures in the corners of their eyes. I knew what they were talking about. But when they tried to report it, the company just brushed them off, told them it was the stress, the isolation, that they were imagining things. But I knew better. I could feel it in my bones. Whatever was down there wasn't just an accident, a freak occurrence. It was deliberate. We weren't meant to find it, and that's why everything seemed to fight back when we tried. I don't know who was behind it, but I could sense that the whole mine, the whole place, was connected to something far beyond anything I could understand. I had a bad feeling, and it wasn't just paranoia. This wasn't going to end. Not until they got what they wanted. One day, as I was walking through the mine, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't the light. It wasn't the creatures. It was something else entirely. One of the older miners, Raphael, was standing in front of a wall, staring at it as if in a trance. I tried to call out to him, but my voice caught in my throat. The closer I got, the more I realized that something was wrong. His face was pale, his eyes wide and empty, as if he was seeing something beyond the walls of the mine. He didn't even react when I stood right next to him. His hand was pressed against the cold rock, but his fingers were trembling, almost humming. It was like the wall was alive. As I watched him, I felt it again, that pull, that constant sensation of being watched. But this time, it wasn't just a feeling. I could hear something faint, like whispers, low and distorted. The sound seemed to come from the rock itself, from the very earth beneath our feet. It was unnatural, alien. And when I looked at Raphael, I could see the change in him. He wasn't the same man anymore. His eyes, which had once been bright, were now hollow, like he'd aged decades in just a few hours. Before I could ask him what was going on, he turned and stumbled away, muttering something I couldn't understand. That night, Raphael disappeared. No one ever saw him again. The next few weeks were a blur. I couldn't sleep, couldn't work, couldn't think straight. It felt like the mine had become a living, breathing thing. I could feel it watching, every corner, every shadow. And the strange occurrences kept happening. Things disappearing, equipment malfunctioning, and the sound, that damn buzzing sound. No one else seemed to notice, but I could hear it constantly. It was in my head, in my bones. And then, one night, I woke up with the overwhelming sense that I had to go back. Something was calling me back to that spot in the mine, the hole where I'd seen the creature. It was like a magnet, pulling me in. I didn't want to go, but I couldn't fight it. I found myself standing at the entrance of the mine once again, staring into the darkness. I knew what awaited me down there, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to go. As I walked deeper into the tunnels, the air grew thicker, colder. The buzzing in my ears grew louder, more distinct, until it became unbearable. It wasn't just the mine anymore. It was them. I knew they were there, watching me, waiting for me to come to them. I didn't have the strength to fight it anymore. I found the hole again. It was just like I remembered. Cold, dark, and pulsing with that strange blue light. But this time, the light was stronger, brighter, and the hum in the air was deafening. I stood there, staring down into the abyss. I felt something shift, like a weight lifting off my shoulders. And then I saw it. That same figure, the creature, standing at the bottom of the hole, its eyes locked on mine. But this time it didn't feel like I was being watched. This time it felt like I was connected to it, like we were linked, like it knew me better than I knew myself. I don't know how long I stood there, just staring at it. I don't know if I was hypnotized or if it was something else, but I could feel my mind slipping, like I was being pulled into a dream that I couldn't wake up from. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the light went out. The buzzing stopped. The creature was gone. I was back in the mine, standing alone, the hole now nothing more than a crack in the earth. My heart was pounding, my body shaking, but I couldn't move. I couldn't understand what had just happened. I couldn't explain it. And then, just as I turned to leave, something strange happened. A voice, my voice, but not mine, whispered in my ear, "It's not over." I ran. I ran as fast as I could, not stopping until I was out of the mine, gasping for air, but even then I could still hear it, the buzzing, the whispers. I knew it wasn't over. I knew they were still out there, waiting, and I knew that sooner or later they would come for me again. It's been years since that night, but I haven't been able to shake the feeling that I'm still being watched. Sometimes when I'm alone, I'll hear the buzz. It's faint at first, but it's always there, just beneath the surface. I've tried to forget. I've tried to move on, but I can't. I don't know what happened in that mine or what they want with me, but I know that it's not over, and maybe it never will be. So, what did you think of this story? Did it scare you? Was there a part that gave you chills or stuck with you the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. If you've had a similar experience or have suggestions for improving future videos, let me know too. Thank you for watching and being part of this amazing community. See you in the next story.